What do you do when life falls apart? That's the question I explore with author Lindsey Goldstein in this episode of The Life of Try. We talk about her novel, Gap Year, and the powerful idea of starting over when life takes an unexpected turn. Our conversation explores reinvention, the courage to try something new before you feel ready, and how challenge, whether in writing, running, parenting, or climbing, can open the way to growth. It's a thoughtful, encouraging discussion about letting life unfold, learning through failure, and choosing yourself when the moment calls for it. Lindsay,
Hi, nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
I'm so excited to talk to you because your novel, Gap Year, I mean, it involves two of my favorite things, climbing in Ecuador. But more than that, I mean, it also just the courage of your main character, Jane. You've set her up with this big inflection point, and I'm gonna read from the blurb. Jane's life is turned upside down within 48 hours. Her only child leaves for a year abroad. Her husband abandons her for another woman, and her boss issues her an ultimatum. She makes an bold, impulsive choice. She's going to leave it all behind for an adult version of a gap year. She heads to Ecuador to climb the volcano she once dreamed of summiting, hoping the challenge will help her rediscover who she is after decades of putting everyone else first. So, that's such a good setup. What do you think enables Jane to, take that gap year to leave it all behind and choose herself and instead of trying to hang on?
Well, I think all of us have things that we always wanted to do,
Mm-hmm.
and we had kids, or we got married, or we got a different job, or something that precluded us from doing those things. And
Yeah.
so Jane finds herself in this unique position that everything comes to a head at once. And she always wanted to do this in her 20s. She was a budding ecologist then. She abandoned that at the time to get, her CPA and take a very
Mm-hmm.
practical job to support the
Right.
family. And she realizes there's really nothing standing in my way now, that my child is off on her own gap year to Spain. My husband is off with another woman. And she never loved her job as a CPA. It was just a filler. Um, and now she's faced with, I take this promotion, or essentially she's asked to resign because her position's already filled. So, I mean, why not? She decides she's gonna, like you said, for the first time in her life, do something impulsive
Mm-hmm.
and grab life by the horns and do something she'd always wanted to do in her 20s. So
Yeah.
that's what happens.
Yeah, it's such a good setup. It reminded me of a quote from the Buddhist nun Pema Chodron. She talks about when things fall apart. One of my favorite books is, and her quote is, "Things falling apart is a kind of testing and also a kind of healing. We think that the point is to pass the test or overcome the problem, but the truth is that things don't really get solved. They come together, they fall apart, they come together again, they fall apart again. It's just like that. The healing comes from letting there be room for this all to happen, room for grief, for relief, for misery, for joy, and somehow that's seems to be what Jane embodies as she like lets go, right?
So I think, and I have her say this a few times, and her daughter reiterates it, and it's something my mom always said to me. Everything has a funny way of working out.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't necessarily mean it works out the way you want it
Right.
to, but
Right.
it does work out one
Yeah.
way or another. And so I think Jane also takes that with her.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to go, and one way or another, this will work out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not just her trip to Ecuador and climbing the volcano, but all of it, all of this mess that her life has become.
Yeah, and she gives it the space to work out. That's what's so cool about the setup, I think. I mean, not very fun situation that Jane's in, but yeah, she really does put it to space. And one of her friends that she meets along the way, Laura, she says, "I'm pretty sure climbing a volcano won't be my calling, but it will give me some confidence to try something new. Or at least I think so." And, gosh, that matches my experience. Trying one thing leads to another. And, how did you come up with that wisdom for the gap year?
I think that I've lived my life that way. I
Hmm.
mean, let's take writing, for example.
Yeah.
I started out by, I didn't necessarily write anything until I was about 39. I mean, I
Hmm.
wrote papers for school and all
Right.
that, but in the back of my head, I always wanted to write, but I was afraid to.
Mm-hmm.
But I gave myself, I guess, license to try something small. So I started
Yeah.
with personal essays, and when those started to gain a little bit of traction, I was able to publish some of those. That was when I could then segue into
Hmm.
trying to write a book. And so
Right.
I think that relates
Hmm.
what you were saying.
Yeah. Well, and you know, we're talking about, being hiking and climbing. I think that practice, the getting strong, the, doing the small challenges to get to do the bigger ones. I mean, it really does work to help build up the stamina in internally and externally.
And that's, it's something that I guess I've learned in my
Hmm.
life. And I try to impart now to my kids. I feel like they get very frustrated when they try something and they're just not automatically good at it.
Hmm.
And I tell them,
Right.
nobody is, I mean, maybe there's the very small percentage of people who are perfect at something the first time they try it. I said, but for the most part, people try something and then maybe they fail. And I said, and for me, it was getting over that fear of failure. I have had the deepest seated fear of failure most
Hmm.
of my life. And it was realizing that I actually learned something from failing. And that's because I tried it. If I don't try it and I don't fail, I won't learn anything. So you can apply that to hiking. Jane does.
Yeah. Right. She
um,
does.
you can apply that to writing. I mean, I failed many, many times. I don't
Hmm.
even know if I would call them failures. I think I would just call them learning
Hmm.
experiences.
Hmm.
But that's how you get to where you want to be. So,
Right. And it might not even be where you want to be, sort of a la Jane. It's going to get you somewhere, right? You're going to get somewhere. Yeah, that's true. And, I think with my kids, I see this, they'll watch YouTube videos of people who are really good at doing that trick shot or whatever. And it's like, but do you know how many times they videoed something not working? That's totally edited. They didn't put the part where they had to do it 1,000 times in order to get that one shot.
absolutely. I
Yeah.
mean, I tell them anything that's, I think, worth having in my
Hmm.
life, I had to work for it.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
you
Hmm.
get such satisfaction out of
Right.
working hard to improve, whether it's hand-eye coordination,
Hmm.
for me, tennis, or just
Yeah.
that, neuromuscular connection
Hmm.
of fingers to keyboard and words being produced.
Right.
But I said nothing starts out easy,
Hmm.
and that's why I said it's worth continuing. I
Yeah.
said it's eventually you get to a point where there's such enjoyment from it.
Yes.
When I started out running years ago, I started out running because I decided I no longer wanted to play tennis when I got to college. And I had this, I don't know why, but I really wanted to be on the crew team. And I'm
Hmm.
5'5" and 122 pounds. They only had a heavyweight crew team.
Yeah.
So the next lightest person was 150 pounds and 5'11". And I thought I'm gonna do this. So I did. I hung in there for 2 weeks at tryouts, and finally the coach came to me and she said, "You know what? Have you ever thought about being a coxswain?" And I
Hmm.
said, "No, I'm not gonna do that. I'm not gonna sit in a boat and yell at people." So I remember for the first time in my life, I just willingly went for a run because I had a
Hmm.
lot of anger to
Yeah.
burn off. So I
Yes.
went for a run, and then I started running every day, and that led to, you know, post college running marathons and countless numbers of half marathons. And running was something that I hated doing when I was much younger, and I think it's because I hadn't practiced it. You
Yeah.
get to a point where you practice it so much that it feels good.
Hmm.
And this is, like you said, I try to tell my kids this, you should have seen, because my daughter will say, "How many miles did you run today?" And, I'll say, "Oh, it's only 4 to 5." Only 4 to 5, And I said, "You know how long it took me, though, to get to the point where I say, that's feels good and it's pretty much nothing, that's like, it's nothing. I
Yeah.
said it took me years and years and years of making my body practice
Yeah.
this. So,
I love that story though, from tennis to crew to running. Talk about letting things unfold.
and like you said, I didn't get to be on the crew team, but it led me somewhere.
Right.
It led me to decide to go for a run that day.
Yeah.
And that, I mean, opened a whole new world for me of
Hmm.
friends and running community. And
Right.
it's a whole another breed of people.
Yeah. And a different, right. Well, that's true. And different places to do things like marathons, right? I
Yeah.
imagine.
Oh,
Right.
yeah. I
Right.
got to do the New York Marathon, which is still one of my top
Mm.
experiences in my life.
Oh man, I imagine that's a hard one to get into.
I was lucky. A friend of mine, her father had several lottery tickets,
Mm.
and she gave me one. So I did not have to qualify. I'd only run at that point one other marathon.
Hmm.
Just I mean, running through all five boroughs was amazing, but also people of every religion, race, whatever, cheering you on and
Yeah.
coming together as one. Like, I was crying by the end. And I
That's so
remember a
cool.
good friend of mine that lived in New York City, she was following me pretty much the whole time. She was taking subway and taxis and buses. So you finish in Central Park, and I saw her, and the light was, it was kind of that golden light at the end of the day, and it was dappling on the leaves, and just the whole thing. I just started to cry, and she's very motherly, and she said, "Are you injured? You're injured. Stop running." And I said, "No, I'm not injured. I'm just so happy. Like, this has just been such an amazing experience." And I said, "And also, you're out of your mind. I have 2 miles left.
Yeah.
I'm not stopping."
That is so neat. What a great story.
It was
That's,
amazing,
that is
amazing.
that's wonderful. Yeah, I think, and I would say one of the climbing quotes that has always struck me comes from the French poet and novelist Rene Damal, and it's one climbs and one sees, one descends, one no longer sees no longer, but has seen. There's an art in conducting oneself in lower regions by memory of what one has seen higher up. When one can no longer see, one can at least still know. And I think, that's what you've written in this book for Jane is in the effort and talking, to you about running or hiking, all those things. We get that confidence from
Hmm.
trying these things. And then we
Absolutely.
can still use that to apply to parenting, to any other tough thing we want to do, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Like,
Yeah.
I ran a marathon, I can have a baby.
Yeah, right. Which is a perfect segue to my next question, which is a two-part question. I mean, you have a career, you're a mom and a wife. And then you decided to add author to your long list of accomplishments. How did you go about researching a book that includes Ecuador and the Galapagos and climbing?
So, I mean, some of that I used my own experience there. Like, I knew which areas I wanted to include in the story because of places that were special to me when I lived
Yeah.
there and still
And
special.
say more about when you lived there.
So I lived there. I took I guess, more traditional gap year when
Mm.
I was 18, 19. So I
Mhm.
deferred college and then repeated my senior year of high school for no credit
Mm.
and lived there for a year. And then I spent 2 subsequent summers there. Galapagos is still one of my favorite places in the world. But while living in mainland Ecuador, there were certain places that, I mean, I loved Quito and I loved Cuenca, just such a beautiful city. And when people would come visit, I always took them to Otavalo, to the fish
Yes, one of
market
my
there.
favorite places in Ecuador.
And but obviously I hadn't been there since 1996. So there was a lot that I knew had changed. So I did go back and see what had changed,
Mhm.
what new construction there was, what looked different, what looked the same.
Mhm.
And then as far as climbing Cotopaxi, I did not do that. So I spent about 2 months researching what you would do to train, what kind of equipment you would use, what it looks like. I read lots and lots of accounts of climbing it and preparing for it, and use different people's, perspective and experience. And also all the guiding companies, I read what their guidelines are just so that I would understand what I would be getting myself into. And just as far as finding time for that,
Yes.
I mean, I would say that now I've gotten to a point where I do write almost every day, but that's because if I have a half an hour or an hour, I will take that time and I will write. Or then if I need, or even now, if I need to research, I will give myself a task for that day with the time that I have available. There was a time in my life where I felt like if I don't have 4 to 5 hours, I don't have time to write. But that's gone out the door because with as far as my job as a physical therapist, I do schedule my own patients, so I can decide I'm going to see patients, 3 days a week or 4 days a week, and then set aside this time. Parenting, I don't have a choice.
Right.
So I also make sure that if I'm going to have time to write, it's during the time that they're at school, because otherwise nothing gets done. And I'm useless at night. And I know there's people who wake up at 5 and write till 7. I love to exercise, and that's my time for exercise, is to get up in the morning and do that. So it's just about when you have the time, not sitting down and scrolling.
Yes,
Or
that's true. And I love what you just said about even if it's just a half an hour, it doesn't have to be a huge block. It's just about the regularity of it.
so I try really hard to be diligent and not just sit down with my phone and look at social media or something, but no, I'm going to take out my computer and I'm going to write for that. Any little snippets of time that I have are
Yeah,
valuable. So,
right. That's so good. I mean, and it's just like practicing on the running, hiking, climbing scale too. You get it's working up that muscle.
yes,
Yes.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Um, and it is something, my daughter, she likes writing, and she said, "You're such a good writer, Mom." And I said, "But I've been practicing now for 11 years." And I said, and even, now if I write something today, I think maybe it's a little bit better than something I wrote yesterday. I said
Hmm.
it's been practicing and reading a ton, you know, and then I get to sprinkle in the occasional conference, or those are just like back to back seminars of learning things from professionals. So
Yeah.
those are few and far between.
Of course. Given your phase of life. What what would you do if you were to take an adult gap year? Do you have anything on your list?
Honestly, I mean, if everything else from my life just faded away,
Well, let's hope without the trauma. Without the trauma that Jane.
I have always wanted to do a writer's retreat,
Mm,
somewhere scenic,
hmm.
ideally.
Hmm.
But I would love to live somewhere scenic, and that would allow me to go out for a run or something, but where I'm inspired to sit and do mostly just write during the day.
Hmm.
I mean, I guess I sort of always think about somewhere in Europe,
Hmm.
like
Right?
Italy. But that's what I think I would do for a
Yeah.
year, is spend the majority of my time writing,
Right.
and somewhere very scenic
Mm, that sounds lovely.
with good food.
Yes, yes. Renting a villa in Tuscany with
There you
good
go.
food, wine. Let's I think your passion for writing comes through in this book and in talking to you. So clearly I think that would be well suited for you.
Yes, I agree. Thank you. Yeah, I always threaten my husband. Not threaten, but I say hint, I guess is a better word. So, what would make a wonderful gift? You could just send me, even if it's for a week,
Right.
to this chateau in France where I can just sit and write. And he's like, "Okay, when are you doing this?" No, no time
Right.
soon.
Right.
No time soon.
Right now it's just on your dream list, but
Yes,
Yes.
exactly. I can
Yeah.
dream.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk about your book, Gap Year, and
Thank,
all your pursuits. So fun to talk to you.
thank you so much, Wynne. It's been awesome talking to you.
Have a great day. Thank you for listening. Our music was written for us by the incredible duo of Jack Campora and Rob Koenig. For show notes and more great inspiration, see avitiva.com, avitiva.com.